Good morning, everyone.
Howdy.
Hello, hello. We're just starting our meeting. We're gonna give it a few minutes for people to get here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hope everybody's staying warm. It's really, really windy here in Portland. I was chatting with Gary, and he said there's snow over, covered in snow. So, morning, Brianna.
Anna.
Hi there. Good morning.
Hello, Brianna. Morning.
I'm curious for the attendees, for everybody, if you're able to use your camera. I see everybody's off, and I don't know if that's on our side or your choice. Okay, good. Just curious. You don't have to, but hi, Amy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay,
I just have a
Michaela.
kid home for a snow
Hello.
day, so she's keeping herself in. So
Okay. Awesome. Morning, Sylvia and Kivo. Well, I think we can start getting started. Um, Thank you for your time this morning. I think we have a really, really interesting uh, few hours ahead of us. So I hope you enjoy it and you can take care of yourself during this time. It's 3 hours, so it's quite a bit of time together. Um, I would love to see your faces at some point. So if you're comfortable when you feel like it'd be great to engage with the video, but also feel free to take breaks and turn it off when you need to or feel comfortable. Um, I really quickly want to say hello. I want to also welcome Gary and introduce Gary. I don't know if everybody has met him, but Gary Sims is my teammate, and he is the new um, racial disparities program analyst, maybe,
That's
for home
correct.
ownership. So Gary has taken in the role of coordinating the program that you're all working with. And we're also here with Kibble Giscombe. Kibble is the director of the homeownership division. So I am gonna let Gary say hello and Kibble, and then we'll pass it on to our presenters for the day. So Gary.
Okay, thank you, Magda. And I've already shared with you, everyone, how Magda has really went through a lot of work to make sure that we have this training for you. And I just want to thank all of you for participating. And hopefully, when you walk away, you have some deliverables that you can utilize and use. That being said, I don't want to take too much time, but it's a great honor to introduce our director, Kiwo Giscombe, and I'll ask him to go ahead and share some words with you. And hopefully, we'll be starting our way. Director?
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate you all in attendance. I'd like to start by saying sorry for the hiccup earlier this week. I know we're supposed to start off, and there's some things that happened behind the scene that created some confusion. So my apologies there. But like I said, good morning, everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you for joining us today for one of two special webinars on the basic of language access planning. Your presence here signals your commitment to breaking down barriers and ensuring more inclusive, equitable, and service for all. We are thrilled to partner with the Institute for the Study of Americas at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a team with extensive experience working alongside local governments, community-based organizations to advance language access and other inclusive policies. Their expertise will be invaluable as we navigate this critical work together. At the Homeownership Division, we are deeply committed to closing the racial disparity gap in homeownership here in Oregon. We recognize that systemic social and economic exclusion has placed an undue burden on many individuals and families. That is why we must remove barriers to our programs and offer meaningful, accessible service to those who need the most. Thanks again for the funding from the Racial Disparity Program. We have a unique opportunity to eliminate language barriers, expand outreach, create pathways for homeownership for communities that have been historically been left out. Your participation in this work is a testament to your dedication to equitable access, and we are incredibly grateful to have you all as partners in this journey. We also want to acknowledge that facilitating language access is a learning process for all of us. Developing a language access plan is new territory for many, including our agency. In fact, OHCS is currently updating our LAP, navigating the same challenges and opportunities you all are facing. That is why this collaboration is so valuable. Not only will we learn from one another, but we'll also gain insight from field experts who can guide us in creating a more culturally responsive practice. Please remember, this is a collective effort. If you need support, guidance, or simply want to share ideas, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, to Mr. Sims, to Magda. We're here to assist you every step of the way. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed presenters. Anna Gill, Program Director for Building Integrity Communities at the Institute for the Study of Americas, Brianna Gilmore, and Emily Spagenberg, a bilingual program coordinator. So I'm excited for this, and thank you all, and let's get started.
Thank you, Kiko.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It is we're just delighted to see you all here today, and we are we're looking forward to a really interesting, hopefully, afternoon with you all, and excited to hear your feedback and hear a little more about the work that you're doing as well. So I'm Hannah Gill, and I am here today with my colleagues Brianna Gilmore and Emily Spangenberg. We're here in North Carolina. We're with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and our work here at the Institute for the Study of the Americas focuses on creating language access plans with local governments and community-based organizations in North Carolina. And we work with teams to create language access plans and build leadership and civic engagement opportunities for residents who are born in other countries. And so we're just excited to hear of the work that you're doing here in Oregon, and we're excited to meet you all today. So I'm gonna pass it off to my colleague Emily, and I'll be back in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So as Hannah and Mr. Gary Sims have mentioned, my name is Emily Spangenberg. I am the bilingual program coordinator for the Building Integrated Communities Initiative. And I am just going to start our presentation off today by talking about some kind of key terms and coming to a common understanding of what language access is and what some of the kind of a general overview of what a language access plan is. And then later we'll be taking a deeper dive into all the components of a language access plan and some of the recommended steps for writing one. So I'll just kind of get us started by hearing from you. We will start by defining language access, and I'd like to hear what you all think when you think of language access, what comes to mind, and how is it important to your job or to your organization? So just feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if you have any thoughts on either of these questions.
I'm happy to start. So we have federal programs, and we know that there is a requirement for a language access plan for federal programs, and I'm really hoping that what we're doing today will go beyond that.
Yes, definitely. And I should have mentioned too, if you don't mind sharing your name and maybe the organization that you're with, if you share anything with us today, that way we also have an idea of kind of where all of you are coming from as well.
I can jump in. My name's Amy Hamilton. I'm with Dev Northwest. Can you all hear me okay with these headphones?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me okay with the headphones?
It's a little bit quiet, yes.
I don't know how to fix that. All right.
That's okay. I can turn my volume up.
Well, I was going to say is that, we just like the previous person said, it's required for these grants, but also I feel like this is a thing that we, as an organization at Denver Northwest, have really committed to providing equitable access for our servicers, and yet we don't do an awesome job of it. We've really committed and have a high proportion of bilingual Spanish-English staff on our team, and all of our servicers are available in English and Spanish. But when it comes to all the other languages that we also need to have access to, it's a very minimal plan that we have in place. We have sort of a plan and we have a translation service that we use, but that's not much, and we want to do better. And so I'm hoping that through this we can learn what more we can do and how we can do better at serving those outside of the Spanish language population.
Great. Thank you. Others, when you think of language access, what comes to mind and how is it important to your job and organization?
Hey, sorry, I'll jump on. So sorry. I'm sick and it's snowing here in Salem, Oregon, and so we've been scrambling. We had to shut everything down, so I'm working from home. So sorry, everyone. But my name's Jody Barnes. I'm from Habitat for Humanity of the Mid-Willamette Valley, and language access to us is an important thing. We're trying to get all our documents translated into the top languages in the area, so Spanish and Russian, so we can better serve our families and our communities and make sure that everybody has access to the same services.
Great, thank you.
I'll go again. This is Mary Howell from NeighborWorks Umpqua. We've been working really hard to recruit staff that are bilingual and diverse, and not having a language access plan and policies on how we do that work really sends a message that we're not ready. So.
Yes, definitely. We will be talking a lot more about kind of staff recruitment in the next couple of hours as well. Great. Anyone else? What comes to mind when you think of language access, and how is it important to you and your position or to your organization in general?
I can jump in. My name is Kayla Bronze. I'm with McMinnville Area Habitat for Humanity, and very similar to the other people who have shared. We've been on a language accessibility journey for about 1.5 years now, and I think we're learning now that while we're removing barriers, there are still so many barriers that we just didn't even know existed. So making language access truly accessible is something that we're hoping to gather during this training. We've translated our documents, we have interpreters, we have Spanish speaking staff, but I mean, we don't have any ASL speaking staff, and we don't have any accessibility measures on our website for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. So there are just some gaps that we're learning we need to learn how to fix.
Great. Well, and as you mentioned, and we'll be mentioning several times in this presentation too, language access is indeed a journey. It doesn't start and end with the plan, but it is very much part of a process. And so it's great to hear that you're already 1.5 years into it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what your organization has been doing as we go on in this presentation. All right, maybe we'll do, if one more person wants to share, when you think of language access, what comes to mind, or how is it important to you in your position? And then we can kind of move into talking about some terminology and general overview. But maybe if one more person wants to share, that would be great. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and maybe move on to the next slide, if you can change it. Thank you, Brianna. Okay, so we've already touched on some of the aspects of this and just what some of you have shared on what you think of when you think of language access. So we heard about, identifying some of the key languages in your community, identifying ways to improve communication and service delivery. I heard a bit about staff recruitment. Some of you already have a fair amount of bilingual staff. Some are still trying to go through that process. These are all really important elements of guaranteeing language access. So here, and we'll be providing a handout after this presentation, so don't feel like you have to write all of this down or get this all word for word right now. But our kind of general working definition of language access is providing individuals with limited English proficiency, often called LEP. Some of you have likely run into this term before in your work that you've done so far, or who prefer to speak languages other than English with reasonable and meaningful access to the same services as individuals who speak English. So those terms, reasonable and meaningful access, are key in understanding kind of what language access is and how you are providing it in your organization. Timeliness is also an element. So, depending on the resources available to you and services that are necessary or being requested. Another kind of component of language access is making sure there's not kind of an undue delay in providing information or services. Language access can also refer to laws and policies that guarantee access to written, verbal, or visual information and services in people's preferred languages. So a couple of you mentioned the kind of the requirement for organizations receiving federal funds to have a language access plan or to provide language access. That particular mandate comes mostly from Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prevents discrimination based on national origin. Executive Order 13166, which was signed in the year 2000, that again just kind of gives some more guidance on how Title VI applies specifically to individuals with limited English proficiency and gives guidance to federal agencies for how to plan to provide reasonable and meaningful access to them. Language access can also refer to various state and local laws and policies or organizational policies. So these are kind of there are of course other components to it, as we've mentioned in our discussion, but this is when we're referring to language access within this presentation today, this is sort of our general working definition of it. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. All right, why is language access important? This is something else we've already kind of hit on in some of your comments as we were getting started today with this presentation. We found in our work at Building Integrated Communities with various local governments across the state of North Carolina that providing language access responds to the highest priorities of communities. And so we do a lot of community-based participatory research as part of our work here at BIC. And language inevitably comes up and as an important component of relationship building with local governments and organizations, access to services, and just general well-being, particularly of immigrant and refugee communities, but really anyone who prefers to speak languages other than English or who may have that limited English proficiency. It also facilitates access in languages that people feel most comfortable or most empowered using. So sometimes it's not necessarily a question of ability, but just of preference in how people prefer to communicate and how they would most like to do that. Guaranteeing language access helps guarantee accuracy in communications, and it can help build trust with institutions. And as I already mentioned, and as some of you have also kind of alluded to, it helps to guarantee rights that are outlined in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the Civil Rights Act, as we know, it protects against discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. So language is typically, national origin is bolded in this definition of the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, because that is what is most directly tied to language. That's how it gets interpreted. Next slide, please. All right. So again, as a reminder, we will get into all of these components in more detail, especially in kind of the latter half of today's presentation. But when we're talking about a language access plan, what are we talking about? So we're talking about a document that outlines policies, procedures, and implementation steps to effectively provide services and information to individuals who prefer to communicate in a language other than English. So a plan, there's not necessarily a standard template for what a language access plan should look like. But a lot of our guidance comes from the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And so that's where a lot of the guidance that we'll be discussing today comes from. And there are lots of resources currently on their website for how to make a language access plan. But basically, you can think of a language access plan as your organization's roadmap for how you will provide services and communications and maybe train staff in interacting with individuals who prefer to speak languages other than English. And a language access plan, again, we'll be getting more into this in the next few sections, but you can think of it as a living document. So by design, it's meant to be kind of reviewed and revised with changing demographics, priorities, and resources. So someone, earlier as we were getting this presentation started, mentioned that they've been on a language access journey. And that is very common. A language access plan by design is kind of flexible and is meant to be kind of a snapshot of the resources and community needs that you are facing at any given time. And my colleague Brianna just dropped a link in the chat, lep.gov. That is the website that's maintained by the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. That has all kinds of resources. Some of you may be familiar with it, but there are kind of examples of language access plans in different agencies. There are all kinds of templates and tools, guidelines that staff in different places use, bilingual flyers, designs for bilingual resources. I recommend that you check it out if you haven't yet, just to get some ideas for things that your organization might be able to use to kind of better engage with community members who speak languages other than English. Any questions so far? We've got a few key terms that I'll review before we start kind of diving into the actual drafting of the language access plan, but I do just want to pause here to see if anyone has any questions or anything that they would like to share. All right. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Brianna. Okay, so again, just so we come to a common understanding of some terms that we'll likely be using pretty frequently without today's presentation, I'm just going to review a few terms and concepts. Again, we'll be providing a handout at the end of today's presentation, just so that you will have a bigger kind of language access glossary available to you, but just wanted to review a few before we get into our, get any deeper into our discussion today. So two terms that I've already used a couple of times today are limited English proficiency, or LEP, and languages other than English, LOTE. There's kind of a subtle difference between these two terms that I just wanted to parse out, because sometimes we use them interchangeably, but sometimes they're referring to different specific things. So let's start with LEP, limited English proficiency. This is a term that comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, and it's a term that is on the census, on the American Community Survey, that rates individuals' ability to speak English less than very well. And so this is a self-ranking. So people who respond to the census, Brianna will talk a little bit more about these data categories in just a bit, but they can, if they speak a language other than English, they can then rate their own ability to speak English. Why is LEP data helpful? It can help you identify in the language access planning process which community languages have a higher proportion of people who may need language assistance. So LEP data are helpful not only in identifying kind of what are the most spoken languages other than English in your community, but you can also kind of do a dive into the data to see among those languages, which ones have higher proportions of people who rate their ability to speak English less than very well. And that can kind of help you make some decisions when it comes to resources, targeted outreach, that kind of thing. All right, and so languages other than English is sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes we consciously use as an alternative to the term LEP. And why is that? We think of languages other than English as being a potential kind of asset-based alternative to LEP. So LEP itself, the term has the word limited in it, and so it's focusing on a limitation. When we use the term languages other than English, it's focusing on the fact that, well, people are fluent in one or more other languages besides English as well. So it's looking at being multilingual as more of a strength inherently in the terminology. And so here, using the word languages other than English, there's an emphasis on language preference rather than skill or proficiency just in English. And it promotes providing services in languages that people prefer or feel most empowered to use. All right, next slide, please. All right. And then just a few other terms. Oh, sorry, somebody. Oh, okay.
Well, earlier they went by.
So just a few more terms here that, again, sometimes get used interchangeably, but there are technically some differences. Translation, interpretation, and then I'll talk a bit about in-language services and communications. Translation, as you can see here, refers specifically to adapting written text in one language to written text in another language without loss or change in meaning. So this is, flyers, newsletters, forms, material that you have on a website. When we're talking about any of that kind of content, we're talking specifically about translation. And ideally, this will be provided by a qualified translator. We'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation as well, but when we're talking about qualified translator, we're referring specifically to ideally a person who has been vetted both for language skills and for translation skills. So for anyone on the call that is bilingual, or if you've worked with translators and interpreters, you may already know that being bilingual is a prerequisite to be able to translate or interpret, but being able to do interpretation or translation is a whole other separate skill that people can spend years kind of building up, being certified for, being trained for. And so that's why we've got the word qualified in bold here, just a reminder to ensure kind of the greatest accuracy in your communications. The best practice is to ensure that these are being done by qualified translators. Interpretation is referring to adapting oral or signed speech, so ASL, or any kind of spoken word from one language to another language, again, without loss or change in meaning. And this, as with translations, the best practice is to ensure that anyone who's providing interpretation is a qualified interpreter. And this is, again, something that you will ideally define within your language access plan, what determines people's qualifications. But generally, there's some sort of assessment and vetting process to ensure bilingual skills and also interpretation skills. In language services and communications, are services and communications that are provided directly in languages other than English, and you might not necessarily need an interpreter or translator for those. So this is something that would often be provided by qualified bilingual staff. So if you have someone, let's say, you interact with a lot of community members who speak Spanish and come in requesting services or needing assistance. If you've got, bilingual staff members who are able to assist them at front desks in service provision, you don't necessarily need the interpreter or translator to do it. And so when we're talking about bilingual staff in particular, it's good to kind of think through these three areas: translation, interpretation, and in-language services, to see kind of which ones bilingual staff may be most qualified to do. All right, next slide, please. Oh, I see a hand being raised.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something. I was thinking as you said these, as organizations write their language access plan, they will kind of make a decision about the qualifications of the providers they use. But I wanted to point out that the language access grant that they received, we also tried to draft some guidelines for the qualifications of the providers that they could use. Just kind of thinking about, being bilingual is one skill. You have language skills, but translating documents takes a lot of preparation and work and different, an additional set of skills. So I just wanted to just invite everybody to revise those guidelines, see if it's something that works for your organization. I know that Oregon has certification for translation and interpretation for medical providers and for court interpreters, but there's nothing for housing service providers. So that leaves, we don't have to use certified providers, but we could still watch out for the qualifications to ensure that we are working with providers that can ensure the quality in the communication and the message. So the kind of baseline that we're using for the grant is in the RFA document. I can also put it in the chat later, just so it's easily accessible. But that may also be a baseline or a starting point for you. And I wanted to say that we borrowed those from the Secretary of State in Oregon, who is also providing translation services for voting materials. So they went through a process to develop those, and we just took them. We revised them, but it seemed like a good starting point. So I'll put those in the chat.
Great, thank you so much, Magda. That's a really good point. And when you mentioned, there's guidelines around medical interpretation and legal interpretation, that's pretty common. And those two fields in particular, there is often, depending on where you are, often an extra kind of requirement that interpreters or translators have some kind of special certification in those areas. For reasons that I'm sure everyone in the call can probably imagine, but that there are two areas where accuracy is incredibly important, because, it could be a matter of life and death, or access to kind of life-changing resources. And also, if you think about it, like, I'm fluent in English, but I definitely don't know a whole lot of medical terminology. Legal terminology in some areas, but others no. And so certified interpreters or translators would have done, kind of had extra experience, or maybe done some extra study in both of those areas, and they would have the vocabulary to be able to kind of most accurately and sensitively, interpret and convey that information, which is super, super important. It's important in all contexts, but I would say like legal and medical are often thought of as two areas where it's extra important to be sure that you are as accurate as possible. Okay. Great. I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. All right. So We're now going to talk a bit about assessments, which is often a first step in making a language access plan. So those of you who have kind of already maybe started drafting a plan or started, as we've mentioned earlier in the presentation, your language access journeys, you may have done some of these steps. But this is basically a way, when we talk about assessments, we're talking about a way to determine your community needs and your organization's ability to meet them. So this, as I mentioned, we often think of this as kind of a first step in drafting a language access plan because it gives you a good baseline idea of what the community needs and priorities are and the resources that your organization maybe already has or might need to be able to help meet them. And assessments, there are often kind of various components of it. We think of it in terms of looking at community demographics and languages, which my colleague Brianna is going to get into in just a minute here. We can also assess staff capacity and points of contact with the community. And finally, we recommend that you seek community input and feedback as part of your planning process as well to determine what those needs and priorities are in a community. All right, and now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Brianna, who will talk a bit more about researching demographics and identifying community languages.
Thank you, Emily. So as Emily said, my name is Brianna Gilmore, and I am the Program Associate here at the Institute for the Study of the Americas. And I really love data. So I love doing this part of the presentation because I think it's really interesting to find out more information about your community that you may already know based on your own experiences, but having data to kind of back that up is really great. So I wanted to get us started with kind of a broad question about what languages are actually spoken in your community. So I am aware that Magda and her team sent out some data about community languages. And so what I'm interested in is we're going to do a little poll everywhere. So on this next slide here, there are like 3 ways you can join. So I'd either open a tab on your computer. Emily just put the link in the chat. You would type in poll everywhere or pollev.com/Brianna Gilmo 874. Don't know why it's that ending, but we'll do it. And so, or you can join by text. So if you have your phone near you and you'd rather join via text, you'll text the number 22333 and you'll send in the text Brianna Gilmo 874. Or if you'd like to join via the QR code, you can scan it as well. So if everyone can just take a second to join via those methods and let me know if you have any questions or concerns doing that. And I'll give us about 1.5 minutes or so to have everyone join. And I'll explain the activity as we're doing that. So in the next slide, there'll be a question and it should pop up on your device and or on the web page that asks you what languages are spoken in your community. And so what I'll ask you to do is to write the languages that are spoken in your community one at a time. So if Spanish is one language, write Spanish and then submit. And we're going to make like a big word cloud of all the languages that are spoken. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And this should activate exactly. So we're seeing some languages here. We'll see it moving around. We see Spanish, Vietnamese, Mandarin, ASL, Russian, Korean, Tagalog, English, sign language, Somali, so the larger the word, the more responses there are. So Spanish, as the largest word on here right now. So we're seeing that be probably a very popular language across all of your communities. Vietnamese, Russian, pretty large as well. We're seeing like maybe like Asian languages, Farsi. Marshallese. Okay. Nope, we're seeing it. Okay. Okay, well, thank y'all so much. So this, I just wanted to get us started as we're talking about language access, recognizing the diversity of languages that we have in our communities. So thank you for participating in this little interactive piece. We'll take a screenshot of this, and when you see the slides, you'll have your own little word cloud for that too. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the census and the American Community Survey. So the data that you received from Magda and her team that helped compile this with the local university, some of that data probably came from the census or the American Community Survey. And the worldwide linguists recognize that there are over 7,000 languages in the world. So it's a little difficult to kind of report back on that. And so the census and the American Community Survey design a system where they are able to kind of classify these languages that people say that they speak into these broader categories. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there is a screenshot of what the survey looks like on the American Community Survey, asking if people speak a language other than English, and then you can write in your language. Additionally, there's the section on this question regarding limited English proficiency that Emily talked about, where based on how you rate your own checkoff, that's kind of how you're classified as in the system of data. Also want to mention, so the census we know is collected every 10 years. The American Community Survey is an ongoing survey that occurs on a yearly basis around the country. And so a combination of those work together to build this database. And so what's really important here is that the data collected via this question 14, part B, is coded into different languages or different categories. So each language will be coded into one of the 4 broad categories that you see on your left. So there's Spanish, other Indo-European languages, Asian and Pacific Island languages, and other languages. Well, outside of Spanish, if you're told that X amount of community members speak other Indo-European languages, what does that really tell you? And this is dependent on, this data is shown through the data.census.gov. So I did a quick search looking at language spoken in Oregon, in Clackamas County, and this is what the census gives me. So going to data.census.gov is a really fun data resource. And they have maps and tables. And so here, it just gives me this information. It tells me about how many people speak these languages. So Spanish, other Indo-European languages, Asian Pacific Island languages, other languages. But like I said, we don't know what that language is. So there's kind of not a great understanding of what this could be outside of Spanish. So fortunately, there is another tool that I want to share with you that is called the Public Use Microdata Sample, or PUMS. And this can also be found via datacensus.gov/app/INDAT. And you have to do a little bit of searching for your geography and variables, which we put here if you're interested in looking for your own kind of section. But here you are actually able to find a little bit more detail regarding the languages. So I took that information and put it in a spreadsheet and pasted it here. Now, the LEP category does not show up on the table, but by summing together the well, not well, and not at all categories, I was able to calculate that LEP number. And so like Emily said, this is a tool in which you can, if resources are needing to be divided up or figuring out, how you're going to allocate those, this may be helpful in understanding, okay, well, there may be some individuals who prefer to speak English or can speak based on their own ability in English a little bit more than others. And so here, some top languages are Spanish, which we saw in the other document, Ukrainian, Russian, German, Armenian, and Vietnamese. I also wanted to give an example about those broader categories that I mentioned. So outside of Spanish, Indo-European categories, like what languages are made up of in that category, include languages like Portuguese, Russian would be included in that category, Ukrainian, German, Armenian would count in that category. Vietnamese, Japanese, Tagalog, those would count under the Asian and Pacific Island languages. And then the other category would be languages similar to like Hebrew, Swahili, Navajo, or other Native American languages. And so if you're interested in kind of learning more about that and breaking those down, the data.census.gov has a good FAQ page with more information. So in addition to just the census data that you can find, we also recommend finding other data sources that can really help identify the different languages that are spoken. So we just showed you 3, the census, American Community Survey, public use microdata. The school system is a great resource. The Oregon Department of Education does provide a yearly report to the state legislature on English language learners across the state. It's a public publication, and it includes a little bit more about the needs of students enrolled and some demographic information. So I would encourage you to look at that and find your area of the state to see if there are any more detailed information as to where these students, what languages they're speaking or where they're coming from. And if it's not reported there, we have had success here in North Carolina reaching out to the school systems individually, asking for that data as we're preparing our language access plans. Health departments are also an opportunity to receive a little bit more data as to what languages are being spoken, particularly with recent arrivals and refugees, as well as like a state refugee office. Depending on policies, they may be able to share some more data that is specific to your area. So I know that was a lot of information, but I hope some of the data brain enthusiasts are out there and that y'all would look a little bit deeper into some of the data, and definitely long term, as we'll describe about the plan and policies, how checking in on these different data sources will keep your plan active and up to date. And so if the Oregon Housing can't provide data in the future, hopefully you'll be able to use some of these tools to find your own data on your own. And I'm going to pass it back to Emily, who's going to talk a little bit about the second section of assessments regarding staff capacity.
All right, thank you, Brianna. I guess maybe before we start, I see that Magda, you have your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
All the questions, but I just wanted to say that I'm going to put in the chat the data set that we shared a few weeks ago with the grantees, just in case there's anyone that hasn't received it. And if you have any questions, you can email me or Gary about it. This report is really cool because it breaks those language groups that Brianna was talking about by individual language. So you'll know exactly what language you're looking at. And it's broken by county. So you can just look at your county and see the top languages spoken in your county. And then you can also see the number of individuals that consider themselves to have limited English proficiency. So you have number of people who speak another a language other than English, and people who self-identify as having limited proficiency. So you can see both, compare, and just to help inform where your resources or efforts go. So just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I will mention too that I'll talk a bit about assessing staff capacity and ideas for seeking community input, and then we'll have some more time for questions. We know that this is a lot of information that we're giving you. So just wanted to let you know that we'll have a few minutes to discuss some of those questions at the end here. All right, so as Brianna mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about how you can assess your staff's capacity to respond to language needs in your community, excuse me. So when we talk about assessing staff capacity, it's really just a process for identifying your organization's existing language access resources and areas where you may need more. It's understanding how to best support staff who engage with the community, and assessing staff capacity can also help you identify how to facilitate multilingual communications and outreach. So before I get started a bit on talking about how we help our partners do this and how we support our partners in doing this in North Carolina, I just wanted to see, for those of you who are kind of already on your language access journey, what are some of the ways that you currently do this, or what are some maybe specific questions that you have about how this is done? Or what might be some things that you would want to look into at your organization to help identify ways to best support staff who are engaging with the community or interacting most often with the public? Sorry,
there's my speaker. I may have missed part of the question or not, but can you just repeat the actual question? Because I'm not sure what you're asking for feedback on.
Yeah, so what are some of the ways that you do any of these 3 points here? So what are some of the ways that you help that you currently identify what your language access resources and needs are? Or what are some ways that you identify how to support staff who are directly engaging with the community or the public and may need some assistance with language services?
This is Meredith. We learned by by diving in and hiring bilingual staff and coming to find that they weren't supported in our reception and front office. So then we had to work to find the funding and hire navigation specialists. And you know, it's hard to break into one program without kind of doing it across the board, but we have started with our homeownership center programs, and it just kind of has helped us identify how many holes we have in other programs.
Great, thank you. Others, what are some other ways that you determine kind of what your current organization capacity to provide language services is? All right, if no one else has anything else they would like to share, we can just, well, go ahead and talk a bit about how we do it here at BIC and how we have supported some of our community and local government partners in doing this as well. Right. So there are different ways you can do this. I just want to emphasize that a lot of this just is dependent on the size of your organization and the kinds of questions you have or information that you want to gather about what some of your existing resources are and what are some of those maybe programmatic areas of need, as Meredith was just explaining, they were able to discover once they had more bilingual staff on board. So the way that we often do it at BIC and the way that a lot of our partners have done this is through giving a survey to all staff, and that includes leadership and department heads. And again, just want to reiterate that this is something that you can and should customize according to the questions that you have and the information that you want to gather. So if there's something very particular that you want to know about a certain like department or a program that you run, you can definitely ask specific questions about those. But if you're looking for just kind of a place to get started, we can provide you with a sample survey for what we administer through our partners. There are also some pretty detailed examples in, again, that site lep.gov that I mentioned earlier in my kind of the first part of my presentation. That is probably more detailed and a little bit more tailored to local government than what many of you who are working in the nonprofit space might need, but it can give you some good ideas for things that you may want to ask your staff. So if you are giving a survey, some additional considerations to keep in mind is whether you want to keep it anonymous. And it's also good to kind of have like a point person or maybe a small team who will create, gather, and then analyze responses. If you have a particularly large organization or many staff members, online platforms like Qualtrics or any other kind of online survey platform may help with that data management. But again, this depends if you're working at a very small organization, something paper-based or even maybe like one-on-one meetings might be more appropriate or kind of more convenient for staff. So just some things to keep in mind as you're designing the staff assessment. Okay, we can go to the next slide. We have a question in the chat that I think is what I'm about to go through here. So what sort of questions are you asking staff? Are you assessing languages spoken by staff or languages they are most often encountering in their work, or both? So the answer is both. And here in this slide, I'll kind of break down a little bit of the common areas that we include in the surveys that we administer in the places where we work in North Carolina. So our kind of survey template that we do tweak according to the places where we're working, just depending on their needs, organization size, and things like that. We typically have 4 sections to our survey. And again, we'll provide an example of this after today's presentation as well, so you can kind of see that and see if that's helpful for you to use in your organization. But we'll have one section that is on kind of multilingual employees and staff policies. And so this section typically asks the kinds of questions that you were asking about, Amy, in your chat message here. There will be a section to identify language that staff speak and maybe their levels of proficiency in the languages too. Whether and how staff use skills in languages other than English on the job. So maybe somebody, speaks Vietnamese, but they never use it on the job, or maybe they have conversational Spanish skills and they're finding that they're using them often on the job. It can be helpful to know that and kind of gather that in a systematic way. You can also ask questions about other special skills and experience. So if somebody happens to have like a medical interpretation certification, as we were talking about a little bit before, that may or may not be relevant to your work, but that might be helpful to know for some situations, or if they've had particular experience doing translation in other contexts and in other organizations. This can be really helpful to know, especially if you're looking to kind of bolster the kind of in-language services that your organization might provide. And again, the idea is just to kind of get a baseline understanding of where you currently are to identify the resources you have and things that you might be able to kind of build up. Jealous of those of you who are getting snow. Here we just have cold rain in North Carolina. I'm seeing all the messages about snow in the chat. Okay, so that's kind of the general section on multilingual employees and staff policies. We often will have another section that is on interactions with residents who speak languages other than English. So this gets again to your first question, Amy. This can help identify the languages that staff are encountering and how frequently. So maybe, I heard a couple people at the very beginning of this presentation mention that they feel like they've got a good amount of bilingual staff who speak English and Spanish, but there are other languages that staff are also encountering that they maybe don't have the resources for. A survey can help identify that. So, maybe in the last few years, you're serving a lot more community members who speak Russian, and in knowing that in a survey can help you identify that's something you might want to build up or might want to make a plan for when you have the need to have interpretation in Russian, for example. Let's see, where am I? Okay, this section can also ask about any special training or procedures that staff are already following on how to interact with or serve clients who speak languages languages other than English, and also whether that data is being tracked and if that's something your organization might want to do moving forward to be able to kind of see the sort of resources you might need over time. And so I'm seeing here in the chat, we've definitely found that just because staff speak another language doesn't mean they're good translators. Yes, absolutely. What we find most useful is utilizing our bilingual and bicultural staff to help us culturally adapt our documents and curriculum. Yes, and so this is something that, you will see, you can kind of chart that over time. You may know by asking people, like maybe they're bilingual, but maybe they don't have experience with translation. That can just, again, help you decide where to more appropriately use your existing staff resources, or maybe identify potential professional development opportunities for bilingual staff too. Knowing kind of what the data for your organization are telling you can help you plan for the future and help plan for even better service delivery. Okay, so a third section that we often ask in our surveys has to do with existing language assistance services and policies. So maybe in addition to or aside from having bilingual staff, what other resources are available to staff members? And so we might look at maybe, if you're already translating publicity, newsletters, that kind of thing, maybe you already have a certain amount of forms that are already translated. A survey can help you kind of take inventory of what's already out there. And again, that can just kind of help flag things that you might want to review, areas where you might be able to offer things in additional languages, areas to see if what you're already doing is reaching the community or is effective. Again, just getting that baseline understanding of what those services are and how you might review them in the future. Let's see, that section can also ask about which language services are most often used. So maybe you already have some contract interpreters and translators available, but you find that people are more often, asking bilingual colleagues for help. That's, not necessarily, there's no kind of value judgment on that. Not necessarily a good thing or bad thing, but it might be a good thing for your organization to know, again, as you're taking stock of your resources and figuring out where you want to put them in the future. It's just a good idea to kind of get a sense of what the practices already are and staff's awareness of the services that are already available to them. And then it's also, this is just, again, another kind of survey best practices sort of thing. We'll have kind of an open section at the end for, we usually just call it additional questions. So questions that maybe don't fit any of these categories, but that we still find really important to know. So this can be, we find one of our richest sources of data actually are open-ended questions for comments or additional information related to language access. So we just ask something that's literally like, is there anything else that you would like to mention about language access at your organization? And that can help you identify things that you didn't even really think to ask about. So, some of these things that you, again, learn once you're putting them into practice, or things you don't know until, the things that you don't know until somebody flags it for you. This can be a good section to get that. You can also identify opportunities for follow-up. So if there are staff who would like to be informed or more involved in language access planning, you can ask that there. If you have very specific, like programmatic questions about like a particular program, a particular form, this might also be a good section to include that. But again, this is a very broad overview. I hope, Amy, this helps answer your question that you asked of like the types of questions that we will administer in surveys. But again, we'll provide a sample survey, and then you can see a little bit more specifically how we word it. And then we'll sometimes have, depending again on the size of the organization, some questions that are kind of only for department heads or leadership. Because in some cases they're the only people who might have that information, but in other cases it might only be relevant to them. So yes, hope that is helpful. You're welcome. Okay, Brianna, we can go to the next slide. All right, so in addition to the demographic data that Brianna talked about and getting kind of a staff assessment, I also just wanted to flag that it can be really interesting to and important to seek community input as part of your assessment phase of the language access plan. So getting input and feedback from the communities you work with can help you identify community priorities and preferences. And it can lead to a deeper understanding of community language and needs. So, you may know that many of your clients speak Spanish, but maybe by engaging a little bit more closely with the community, you'll know that most of them come from Central America, or most of them come from Peru, whatever the case might be. And that can kind of help you understand, what if there are any sort of regional dialects that are important to keep in mind when you're providing language services. And again, this is like gold standard. You're not always going to be able to get like a very specific dialect or accent, but they can be good things to keep in mind when you're requesting language services or engaging with community members who speak languages other than English. So I just wanted to give you a couple of quick examples of ways that we have incorporated community input into our language access plans here in North Carolina. So our process is kind of built on a model in which we have staff from a local government and people who are involved with community organizations meeting regularly to kind of discuss what's going to go into language access plans. And I just wanted to talk about a couple of examples of things that we learned directly from those community-based organizations that helped local governments decide kind of how they wanted to do community outreach and engagement, or things that they included in their plans that they might not have otherwise had they not had that crucial community voice in their planning processes. And so in one of our partnerships, we have a local government team who has decided as part of their plan in doing community outreach, and this kind of goes to someone's comment in the very beginning of this presentation of like not only having a plan, but kind of going a step further than that. So they have a language access plan, but they've also thought about how language access is a crucial component of other forms of community outreach, or it's just maybe kind of one part of community outreach that they do. They learned through their community partner that the way that their community-based organization most often disseminates information to people who are involved with their organization is through short audio or video messages in WhatsApp groups, which is, the local government doesn't have access to WhatsApp, but they were able to kind of form a partnership with this community-based organization to make sure that crucial information isn't just translated and on a website that someone's not going to look at, but they're thinking about other ways of delivering that communication that takes in some of the other kind of social factors around language. So it's not just having materials translated, but it's also thinking about what's the best way that people are going to find and engage with that information, and how they can communicate with the local government too. And so that's not something that people necessarily had at the top of their mind when they were thinking about language access plan. It was more about like getting things translated, making sure there's like Spanish language sections of the website, but then also having that additional piece of like, well, most of the people we work with use WhatsApp really frequently. They're not necessarily visiting websites. In some cases, a cell phone is their main, like the device that they're using, not necessarily a computer. And so that became a really kind of crucial component of how the local government decided that they were going to design other aspects of their plan. So that's one example of how that can work, and why it's important. Another reason, as I've already mentioned, is it can be good to be aware of country and region specific vocabulary to the extent possible. So if you have many people who are living in your community who are from, like I mentioned, Central American countries, vocabulary can be quite different within countries, but definitely within regions too. So to the extent possible, it might be good to have, when you're working with translators and interpreters or recruiting bilingual staff, having services that represent the community to the extent that you can. So people who are going to be familiar with slang, familiar with differences in terminology. This can be really important, especially when it comes to like filling out any kind of legal information, again, medical information. It just helps ensure accuracy, and again, that you are representing the community to the extent that you can. Okay. It's a lot of information, but we want to take a few moments for questions, and then we will do a 15-minute break. But please feel free to ask about anything that we have discussed so far, or anything else that you want to share in the next few minutes. No questions? All right. Okay. If we have, let's see, there's one message. Must be the snow. We're so quiet. Yes, well, we will, nobody has any questions. We can go into our break. And Brianna, Hannah, and I can kind of stick around for the next couple minutes too, just in case if somebody, if a question comes to mind or there's something you want to discuss in a smaller context, we'll be around to answer that too. But why don't we go ahead and break until, let's see, so it's 10:15 there, maybe 10:30. Does that sound good? All right, great. And like I said, Hannah, Brianna, or I will sort of be around too to help answer any questions if something comes up during the break. We'll see you back in 15 minutes.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you grabbed another cup of coffee or tea, something to keep you warm where all the snow is coming down over there. You got the kid to go out sledding. Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Okay. I'm starting to see some people coming back. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with just a little refresher. You know, I'm curious to see who was paying attention in the first half of the webinar. We're going to do another poll everywhere activity. And so I'm going to put the question up here. And the same way that you joined the last one, you'll do it the same way this way. So you'll either enter pollev.com/Brianna Gilmo 874, or you can text that to 22333, or you can scan the QR code on the screen to join. And while you're there, there should be the next question would be a multiple choice question. So we're going to ask based off of the information that I presented on a while ago. The question is, which language was included in the list of languages spoken by Clackamas County residents who have limited English proficiency? So I have answers A, B, C, and D: Haitian Creole, Russian, French, Tagalog. And so go ahead and join and answer. I see we only have 4 respondents so far. And once we get to at least, 8 or 10, we'll move on. But we'll see who was paying attention in the last section. See, we have 8 people who have answered. Is it possible to get up to 10 people to answer? So if you've not answered yet. Okay, we have 9. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. So we'll see what people responded. Okay, so we have 89% said Russian and 11% said Tagalog. And the correct answer is Russian. Good job, good job. So thanks for paying attention. And you already named it earlier with our word cloud as well, which is great. So thanks for playing along there. So now I'm going to pass it up over to Hannah, who's going to talk a little bit more about some policies when you are considering writing up your language access plan.
Okay, everybody. So I'm gonna, in this section where we talk about actually writing up the language access plan, I wanted to first get a sense for how many of you are currently involved in that process. So you can just show your hands. You can put on your screen, show your hands. I'm just curious how many folks are already engage in the writing up of your plan? Anybody? Okay.
Off point, and we're starting to work on it. So kind of.
You're starting to work on it. Okay. All right.
I'm not involved, but my organization is currently working on it. I just started a month ago, so I'm new at this.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks to those of you who shared where you're at. Hopefully this section will be helpful to you for those of you that are that haven't started or are just getting started. That's the hope. So, right. So in this section, we're going to talk about writing up the language access plan. And there are typically a couple main components of the plan. And so those two components are typically policies and then procedures. Next slide, please, Brianna. So language access plans, they typically start with a policy section, which, establishes the mandate for all the practices and procedures that we've been discussing thus far and that you will get into with your language access plan eventually. And this policy section is so important because it creates a sustainability for your plan, because while your procedures and your practices might eventually, might change in the future, the institutional mandate to provide language access, which is expressed through the policy statement, should not change. So as we mentioned earlier, and we're just going to put it up on the screen one more time, this is, some of the resources that we have consulted to guide policymaking with the organizations we work with include the U.S. Department of Justice's Language Access Assessment and Planning Tool. And then also the Migration Policy Institute has a framework for language access. So those two are good resources. And what I'll be talking about in terms of policies is also based on the work we've done with our partners, and then a review of the language access plans of nonprofit housing organizations across the country. And I'll be sharing some more examples in this section. But before I get into too much deeper, Magda is going to share some relevant information about Oregon's language access legal mandates. So I will pass the mic over to her.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I think this is an interesting area, and the organizations that are working on this already, trying to create the baseline for doing this work. I think in Oregon, there is not a statewide language access legal framework. Of course, we have the kind of regulations at the federal level that extend to states when they receive financial assistance from the federal government. So that extends to our state agencies and grantees. But because there's no regulation around language access in housing, like I said, the medical field has some, legal services have some more specific mandates. We are drawing from the federal kind of framework, and also from a few kind of like more umbrella frameworks that support equity, diversity, and inclusion. And they serve as a guideline and a basis for this work. So one of those is the State of Oregon's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan. This plan was developed under the past administration, and it set a goal to strengthen public involvement through transformational community engagement, access to information, and decision-making opportunities. And the strategy that was identified was fostering inclusive communications to ensure that multilingual Oregonians with limited English proficiency and the English language learners in our state could have access to materials in appropriate languages. And the state also set to translate important information and guidance in a timely way. So I wanted to point out that document. I think I can put the link in the chat because it really set up a framework for the entire state and all the public agencies in the state. And then at the level of Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state housing plan, which we just finished implementing, but it still sets some priorities and kind of North Star for our work. Identified equity and racial justice as one of the areas of work and focus. And in order to advance equity and racial justice in housing, we or the agency decided to take a closer look at our programs and practices to remove barriers that we can identify and prevent people from accessing opportunity within our programs and services. So this is another kind of concept and value that guides the work we are doing. And I think we can move to the next slide. Also for OHCS and the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have made as part of our agency's EDI plan. A priority is also inclusive communication and language accessibility. So you can see that in the slide. The agency's EDI plan has 4 areas of focus, language accessibility being one of them. And we hope to respond to the fact that some of our community members are not fully aware of the programs and investments that are available because we don't always provide that information in a way that is accessible to them. So this is another framework that you can draw from, if it's not already part of your agency's EDI plan. But this is an example of how we are kind of framing the language access work for our own language access plan that we are developing. And then if you can go to the next slide, Hannah. And just I think for the individuals here that have been more involved with the grant, the language access grant, these may be familiar, but I just wanted to point out to where the resources to do this work came from. And because I think it really sets the ground for implementing this work and for expanding language access specifically in housing. But in 2019, there was a task force created to identify barriers for homeownership that affected communities of different races and ethnicities. I have a link here. The task force was called Oregon Joint Task Force for Addressing Racial Disparities in Homeownership. And out of the work of that group of, really the task force was a group of community organizations. There were some organizations that work in the financial services, so lenders, banks, just different types of organizations, culturally specific organizations, all with an interest in housing. They had a series of recommendations for the legislature, and the 2 of them that kind of more specifically address language access are here shown in the screen. One was a recommendation for the legislature to provide financial support and technical assistance to culturally specific for culturally specific homeownership assistance. So kind of a dedicated resource so that homeownership services could be adapted and just really be more flexible and responded better to the people who live in our community. And then the second recommendation was to increase homeownership outreach by culturally specific organizations. And these recommendations were made through House Bill 4003 and House Bill 5011. And in 2021, the legislature approved funds to do this work. So our agency receives the funds, distributes them to the community, and these funds come from the general fund of the state of Oregon. So we have kind of guaranteed funding every 2 years for this purpose. So if you are interested in looking up those bills a little more, or the recommendations of the task force, they also do a really good analysis about the barriers that some communities in Oregon face. And this has really informed, I think, the work in our agency, and of course the use of the funds. And I think it's just important to keep in mind kind of where this comes from and what kind of forms the more regulatory and values base for the work that you're doing. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if there's any questions or comments about that.
Any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, thank you so much, Magda, for that guidance. And it's really helpful that the state of Oregon is providing a framework and guidance that can help organizations think about the way that they want to talk about their mandates for language access. And this typically shows up in the first section of a language access plan when you're writing it up, which is general. These are general policies. And this is where, and usually at the top of the document, your general policy, it affirms non-discrimination practices, of course, with particular attention to people who speak languages other than English. And this is where in your writing, organizations can cite regulatory frameworks, legal mandates, such as Title VI, or, some of the regulatory frameworks that you just learned about from the state of Oregon. And I just point out, like, many states do not have regulatory frameworks. So it's great that you do have that here in Oregon. And then I wanted to point out that organizations can also cite their own institutional commitments to language access or language justice, as this example in the slide it illustrates from the African American Alliance in Orlando, Florida. And as we talk about writing up your language access plan in this section, I think one of the helpful things that for us in the guidance that we have provided to our partners in North Carolina, and our partners also just doing this on their own, is just looking at lots of different examples of plans. And we can share with you links to the language access plans of our partners. And there are also examples in the Migration Policy Institute and the federal resources that we already shared with you. Next slide, please. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so another kind of policy that you typically see written up in a language access plan, it would there's in the category of a policy for translation and interpretation. And these policies should really start with a statement that establishes that translation and interpretation are free of charge. And it just establishes this commitment to high quality and free language access resources. And then, you need to include additional details because they're essential to ensure that the policy is actually carried out effectively, as this particular example from the town of Carrboro in North Carolina illustrates. And this could also be a place to include some of the language that Magda shared earlier about professional certification standards of language service contractors, because this section is often concerned with sort of the quality of service. Next slide, please. Staff training policies are also really important, and we we see our partners frequently include them. And these are policies that establish the mandate for educating staff, as well as, I would say, volunteers on how to use the language access plan. And we actually have an example here from the city of Marion in North Carolina that you can see there's a quote pulled out that has very specific language about the mandate to train staff. And we also provided an example from the Neighborhood Community Development Fund in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that also very specifically spells out that there needs to be staff training. Often they delineate how frequently the training happens. Is it every year, every 2 years? And again, without you have to provide additional specific details. Things like the importance of, not using minors or residents' families or friends as interpreters or translators. Let's see, things like determining which language assistance services to request, whether they're simultaneous or versus consecutive interpretation. And then let's see what else. These include how to train staff and provide them with skills on how to properly identify an individual's preferred language. So these are just some of the details that would need to go into this into this policy. Let's see. And again, I would encourage you to read language access plans to be able to, analyze and think about all the additional details that that different organizations are using. And I'd rather than go through it here in the slide, there's so much, you want to just check that out and look over that. Next slide, please. We have found that pay incentive policies are extremely important. There was a comment made earlier about the need to, or the challenges in recruiting bilingual staff and diversifying staff. And, that's just such a foundation to all of this work here. We find that staff pay incentive policies really establish the mandate within an organization to strengthen staff capacities to communicate in languages other than English. And these policies can include, they can establish pay raises for trained and competent bilingual or multilingual staff. They can create a mandate to regularly test staff language skills. And then they also, this is almost like a low-hanging fruit, very easy thing to do, which is just work with human resources to make sure that job applications have that list language skills as a requirement for positions when advertising jobs, so that you're attracting candidates that already have those skills. Okay, let's see. Next slide, please. Okay, policies for community feedback, monitoring, and compliance are also really important. These establish structures for communication with community members about the operations of the language access services. And they can look like a lot of different things, but some examples of what we've seen are complaint mechanisms and community feedback mechanisms. And they also establish the organizational mandate to notify individuals who prefer to speak languages other than English about the existence of the complaint or feedback mechanism. So it's not enough to just have the complaint form on your website, but people have to know about it, and your organization has to make the effort to notify people about it. And then finally, they also have to establish who is responsible here. And this is not the place to put the workflow of who is going to deal with it. That comes in your procedures, but they do need to identify the administrative position or the position that will deal with this aspect of the language access plan. And I think, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Policies for review are of your language access plan are really important, because language access plans, as we've mentioned before, are really, they're a snapshot of the current demographic moment in your community. So these policies review ensure that the plans continue to be relevant in the future. And they typically mandate that the organization must collect, analyze, and update the plan so that it can best serve constituencies. And these policies establish guidelines for when and how that the language access plan should be updated. So some examples of things that that could be some examples of, I guess, instruments that an organization can use to review their plan and how it's working are things like an annual staff language survey, which is something that we've already talked about. Reviewing demographic information that we've already talked about. An assessment or analysis or evaluation of community feedback and complaints, looking at the complaints that have been received. These policies, again, establish who is responsible. And I gave an example here from the Neighborhood Community Development Fund in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, from their language access plan, where, quote, they identify the director of operations as the person who will annually review the language access plan and along with senior management and business unit manager. So it's in the policy of who is responsible for that. Okay. And I wanted to give an example of how this is policies for review can be really helpful. One of our partners, the town of Chapel Hill, they've been implementing their language access plan, which was approved in 2018 now for, 7 years. And they initially created a pay incentive policy when they started their program. And it was like a percentage raise for qualified bilingual individuals in 5 priority languages that they had identified through some of the demographic that they had identified through demographic evaluation. Hold on a second here. There we go. And initially, this pay incentive was limited to just 2 departments within the town. But because the annual review had this mandate to analyze interactions with the town, so specifically which staff are receiving requests or engaging with members of the general public, local residents, and which languages that they're receiving requests in, because they had been tracking that language, they found that there were people looking for services in they found there was need in other departments, basically, and they were able to then expand their pay policy to include staff working in other departments as well. They also made the decision to include bilingual staff in appointments with residents applying for public housing. And they translated their housing application forms into the 5 languages most commonly encountered. So it's just an example of how over time, if you're keeping track and you're reviewing what's going on, that you're able to, you're able to adjust your plan to serve your community's needs. Okay, so I have been talking about the policy section, and hopefully that has given you an idea of what are some kinds of policies that you can write up in your language access plan. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to Emily, who is going to talk about the procedure section of your language access plan. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Hannah. Okay, so as Hannah just mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about procedures and some considerations as you are writing them up. So if we think of the policy section of a language access plan as kind of like what your organization is going to do, so what are some of the language access practices and commitments that your organization is going to make, you can think of the procedure section as kind of the section that outlines how staff will implement those policies. So this is it's a section of the plan that includes steps, guidelines, timeframes, resources, kind of any sort of details that are helpful to have in writing that staff can access or follow to provide language assistance. So again, this is something that's going to depend on the kind of the particulars of your organization and the type of work that you do. But some examples of things that you may want to include procedures for in your language access plan would be how staff will respond to phone calls. So say somebody is calling, either directly speaking a language other than English or indicates that they need some sort of like interpretation or other language assistance. What are some things that staff can do to best respond to that? Similarly, how might staff respond to written correspondence? So emails, if you have some kind of like a text-based service like WhatsApp or something like that, how can staff access resources to be able to respond to people in their preferred languages? Procedures can also include things like how staff are going to track the languages that they encounter or language services that they use. So maybe how frequently are people calling interpreters? What languages are they using? You may also want to consider some guidance on how staff can access interpretation services. So if that means you have a bilingual staff member who has also been kind of vetted for interpretation, what are some of the guidance on seeking support and assistance from that colleague? If you are contracting with language services like LanguageLine or some other kind of telephonic service, how can staff access that? How you're going to identify which documents and information are going to be priorities for translation, how can people request translation of documents, all of that kind of thing. So for anything that you have kind of outlined a commitment to in the policy section, it's good to think about like what are the specifics that staff might need to know to be able to implement them. And I know this section can be a little bit intimidating or even like very difficult to write, especially if you're just getting started. And that's totally fine. I want to reiterate that we've said a few times in this presentation that a language access plan is very much a living document. And the procedure section is probably the section that will change the most over time as you're kind of reviewing practices that work, things that don't work, maybe needs come up that you didn't have when you wrote your initial language access plan. Maybe you have more resources in a certain area. And so the procedures section is probably the one that you're going to tweak the most often. And I just say that because I think sometimes, we've seen it with some of our partnerships that that people feel sort of intimidated by feeling like they need to have all the procedures written out right away. That's not necessarily the case. Include the details that you know, or you can always think of like, what are your top priorities for the things you want to do over the next year or the next 6 months or whatever it might be, that would be helpful for staff to know kind of in the immediate time frame, in the immediate sense. Let's see. And so, yes, so as I mentioned, this is something that will be important to review for effectiveness and relevance. So again, this kind of nods to the section that Hannah was just talking about the importance of reviewing the language access plan. So you may want to periodically assess if resources have changed. Do you have more or fewer bilingual staff who might be able to provide in-language services over time? Maybe you have a new data collecting system that you might be able to better track kind of which languages you're encountering, or maybe how community languages change over time. Those are all things that you can capture in the procedures section. And you can think of this as, again, kind of like a blueprint or a roadmap for your staff to be able to best access language services and better communicate with the community members that you serve. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I want to give one example of I will say this is a fairly detailed example from a language access plan that we supported in the town of Carrboro, North Carolina. So something that came up in a lot of our kind of regular meetings with this team was that, different departments kind of have different systems for communicating, or we weren't quite sure kind of who was going to be coordinating most of the language access services. So something that came out of our regular meetings was that it was going to be important to kind of coordinate those services. So here, I included this example. Yeah.
Second. So would you be able to kind of just reiterate what you just said?
I'm sorry, what happened? I didn't hear the very first part of what you said. The audio cut out.
Yeah, I think your audio cut out for a little bit of it. So I don't know if you can reiterate what you were just saying.
Yes, will do. Thank you, Brianna.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so apologize if I'm repeating myself, but I'm including here an example of a procedure that is relatively detailed. That again, if you don't feel like you have this level of detail yet, that's totally okay. But this is something that this particular team in Carrboro, North Carolina, spent a lot of time in our regular meetings talking about, was the importance of figuring out, because they have so many kind of different systems for requesting things, and it wasn't totally, we're totally sure who was going to be the main kind of coordinator for language access services. That's something we kind of focused on in the drafting process. So we were able to figure out a lot of these details. What I like about this particular example, so this was a procedure that the team came up with for requesting interpretation, is that it covers multiple scenarios. So as a team, we kind of brainstormed like different points of contact where, like, which departments were having more interaction with the public, what those interactions might look like. And so we figured out, okay, we've got to, like, you're not necessarily going to use the same language service provider for on-demand services as you will for, like, if somebody knows in advance that they're going to need interpretation for a meeting with a staff member. And so we spent some time kind of parsing out what that might look like in the town of Carrboro in particular. And so here I like, just kind of, I won't read all the text here, but you can see that in thinking through how they were going to implement their policy that free interpretation services would be available to the public, they thought about, okay, we got to think about how community members are going to be able to request interpretation. So they came up with the language access line for members to do that. They thought, okay, there might be a separate procedure that we're going to need for town staff to submit requests. So if they know that they're planning, let's say, a listening session that they want to invite community members who speak multiple languages to, that's something that they would have to know kind of who to ask or how to make that request of the town for having services available at that meeting. We're also thinking through, like, when would a qualified bilingual staff member be used versus a contract service provider. And these are all things that they kind of decided on internally, but I really like this example because it kind of shows thinking through the multiple needs and kind of scenarios that staff might be facing, as well as resources that are already there. And so this is just a good example of, like, thinking through in as much detail as you can at the moment what systems you have set up or you hope to have set up in the near future that will help you kind of provide the services you need. Okay. So we can go to the next slide.
Okay, so we've been talking to you all for a while now, and we really do believe in the power that you all have and the knowledge that you have that you can bring to this conversation. So the next couple minutes, we're hoping to do some discussions centered around, we have 2 prompts. And so this is the first prompt. And so I'll read it out loud. Your organization has a conversation about prioritizing translation of organization materials, documents, flyers, websites. Many staff members are not sure how to start this process. How could you recommend beginning a translation of documents? So I'd really love to hear from you all. If you want to unmute yourself, come on camera. This would be a great time just to kind of share how you would approach this and also share some questions you have about this example as well.
This is Meredith. So we actually did this scenario a year and a half ago, and fortunately we received language access plan funding, and Magda, she was really our technical assistance person, so she helped us identify a contractor who was qualified to do translations, and we were then able to contract with her. And not only did she do translations, but she also was a cultural competency consultant. So she actually helped us figure out how to translate in a way that was welcoming to the Latin culture that we were doing translations for. And that second part of how do we incorporate ways of outreach and engaging customers in a way that they feel welcome and safe was really terrific. We learned a lot working with her, not just getting the direct translation services. So identifying a person to work with, I think, was our first step.
Thank you for sharing that, Meredith. And it seems like Magda in her office was a great resource to you all in creating those connections, as this whole project seems to be a really great resource. So I am curious, in addition to starting with that identifying a translator, how did you decide what to send to that person? Or what did you prioritize in that decision?
Well, that was a little easier because the grant that we got was for homeownership services. And so then we decided we needed flyers, and if we're doing flyers, then we needed our applications and our surveys translated as well. So it was sort of if we're going to start with a program, and I think we prioritized our IDA program, then in order to do it right, we have to have flyers and all of our materials that customers will need translated.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What about some other people? Where would you either start in this hypothetical, or like Meredith, do you actually have some experience having to make some decisions regarding translations in your own organization?
I can share a little bit. I'm Tania from Hacienda CDC. So most of our staff is bilingual. They speak English and Spanish. So we actually don't struggle a lot with translation because we rely on, like the staff to do the translations most of the time. I do want to say that for example, through this grant, we were able to translate a presentation that we put together. It was lengthy. It was in English, and we partnered with IRCO to do the translation. We work with them, and they have worked with us for some time now, and they work pretty well. Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that even that the staff does speak, like English and Spanish, sometimes it's difficult to rely on them to do the translation all the time as well, because they have their normal work, and just like it might feel also a little bit unfair for us to do that, or just like to have one person that has, I don't know, like the best Spanish grammar or something, and like to rely on them. So yeah, we had definitely used also translators, even with presentations. So I guess, and to respond to the question on how do we prioritize that, so in our specific case, it's just when the staff doesn't have the capacity to do that, is that where we seek this external help. But we basically have all our forms in English and Spanish. That helps a lot with the Spanish population. We serve mostly the Latino community. I think over 50% of our clients are speak Spanish. So having that like surveys and intake forms and everything in English and Spanish helps a lot. And also like having the staff that is bilingual, I would say.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you brought up a really important point that I want to reemphasize here, is that we do see a lot of potential burnout when it comes to individuals who are having to interpret or translate on top of the duties that they're already assigned. So through these policies and procedures of your plan, it's so important to kind of outline at least an idea of how staff time is going to be allotted, and have those conversations with individuals to make sure that they're still able to do other parts of their job, and that if interpretation or translation is going to be asked of them, that things are balanced out within their workload, to really show that not only do you care about them individually, but also want to make sure that they have the support that they need to be successful at their job, and therefore successful in for the entire organization. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's really, we see that in a lot of conversations about this work. And Emily says in the chat as well, translation in particular can take a long time. So it's also helpful to know whether as far in advance as possible when it comes to having things ready to either be sent out and or be done internally in-house. So that is great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I see we have a question or a raised hand. Gary.
Yes, I think in situations like that, and being fair to staff, I think wouldn't it be more beneficial to have like an interpretation services or interpreter externally to come in and do that, so you don't burn your staff out? That's just a question. I mean, even though
Yeah.
you're well, I mean, you speak English well, but it kind of takes away from you, and you're talking about long-term impact on you personally, to go ahead and use an interpreter services. That way you feel as though, hey, I'm doing my job, and also I want to show to my my clients that we care about you enough to get someone in to do an interpretation for you. I'm just saying, I mean, what do you think about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think it's dependent on the organization. So, and I think it's dependent on the job description. So something that Hannah mentioned about having jobs that not only say that this language skill is valued, but also saying that this position as a front desk like a front desk worker, some of those job responsibilities will be to provide in language services, using that language skill that you have. Or it could also be on the other end, Gary, like you're saying, is, okay, well, our policy and our plan is that within the finance department, for example, or HR, where perhaps things are a little bit more technical, and that it's actually better and ethically better to have an external party there anyways to do interpretation, as well as allowing an individual to be able to do prioritize other work tasks too. So I don't know if that makes sense, and if my colleagues have anything else to add as well. But yeah, I think it's very dependent, but that's a great question. You have to really think about what are my duties, and then being able to communicate that throughout the organization. Okay. Any other thoughts about this prompt? Magda, see your hands raised.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to take the opportunity from others, but what came to mind is a situation that we just ran into here internally at OSGS. We decide like on a group of documents to translate, like, oh, these are public facing, let's translate them. And then we found that program staff uses those same forms that community completes for compliance and reporting and record keeping. So if those forms are in Chinese or Arabic or Spanish, our staff are not going to be able to read them. And so I think something we like, okay, we need to engage the staff that interacts with the same form, like even if it's a public facing document, there's probably someone inside the organization using that information, so engaging them in the process. And I think the solution or the idea we came up with is to have bilingual forms, so that the same form has English and Spanish or English and Chinese in the same form, so that it is useful for the community member and also for the staff. So just as a thought, maybe a recommendation, bilingual documents could be helpful, so that they're also useful for internally for the agency if you don't speak the other language.
Yeah, that's a great idea to bring up. And yeah, that way you have someone on staff who receives this document. It doesn't also have to be translated at the same level. This also is important to think about. You can also ask, either do it internally or have an outside, like third party, do a translation guide. So there are certain terms that we as an institution will always use this term this is how we're translating it into Spanish, for example. And so when we're doing forms, we know that these are the terms that we're going to use. And it helps being consistent as well. But I think it's a great idea to really help kind of streamline the process too for all people, regardless of their language abilities, in that situation. And Sylvia says in the chat also that having third party for larger projects is definitely helpful. And Emily and I definitely agree to that. I see she wrote in response that those are great considerations for procedures in a language access plan. Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts, or are we good to move to prompt 2?
I think we have somebody writing something in the chat.
Raina says external interpretation, translations, or services are a good resource, but you do need to monitor both for Q&A, for QA. Do you want to explain a little bit more, Raina, on that? Do you mean like question and answer, or? Or quality assessment, maybe that's it. Quality assurance. Yes. Yes, so that's exactly why. So we also recommend that definitely if you're doing it internally or even externally, getting things translated, that you do have individuals review your translations. And so that's part of like the community feedback process and involving community members. We have some people in our processes that will go and check website like page reviews, review those pages and then send it back to their colleagues and say, hey, this looks pretty good, except 1 or 2 words seem to be off. And that could either be off in translation or similar to like cultural competency or regional dialects or slang. It's like, oh, that's not really a word that we use here or that our community uses. And so also another opportunity to have a visible like complaint and or like feedback form and opportunities for feedback sessions where people can kind of express a little bit more and say, well, you know, I did this and this was my experience, and same with interpretation. So really important point. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our prompt number 2. So this one is, your organization uses grant funds to obtain a telephonic language service provider for your front desk staff. After about 6 months of use, you review the generated reports from the company about usage. It's only been used about twice a month, which surprises your language access coordinator. What could be some reasons for the infrequent use of this resource? So we're kind of thinking here about, you have this service, you have this resource and tool. According to your reports, it's only been used twice a month. Why do we think that is the case? Or what are some potential reasons that that might be the case? I see some people typing in the chat. So feel free to, if you want to unmute, raise your hand, answer. Okay, Meredith says, people from that culture don't expect to receive services in their own language. Kayla says, if people don't know your organization has this service. Great. I see some more people typing. Sydney writes, we have found that consistent staff training on language access tools increases usage significantly. Okay. And Brenda writes, in language service is to provide example Spanish. Yeah, so I think to understand that point is, you know, for example, if I'm a bilingual staff member at the front desk, and I can just speak in Spanish to a client that comes in the door, I won't need to call the third party service. And similar, yeah, Kayla, if people don't know about the service, so let's say you implement this, but then nothing is shared, nothing is kind of communicated to the people either from your organization and or through word of mouth. So word of mouth is really important, as I'm sure many of you all know, being community-based organizations. And so really having a push at the very beginning when you do have a service that's available and like letting people know, and also following up on that quality assurance to make sure that things are going well and that things are being interpreted and translated correctly. Those are great. Magda writes, maybe the staff had a bad experience using the service before and found another way. That's great. I like that this one, Magda, your example also puts it on that the staff are capable to be able to figure out another way to communicate. And so that's why something like a staff survey, if you do it annually, you know, hopefully you kind of get those open-ended questions answered where people can say, I tried this and it worked all right, but I ended up using this source, this resource, or my colleague helps me do this. Those kind of open-ended responses to those questions really help, you know, improve the plan over time, or you can figure out some remediation to say, okay, like in the future, let's try to do this, or let's change this around. So that's great. Yeah, or they would rather speak with our bilingual staff directly. That's also a great point, Meredith. Nothing can really beat having someone in person there that you can not have to speak through a third party for. So those are some really great ideas. Any other kind of thoughts or considerations for this prompt? Okay, so just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you so much for hopping on and listening to us. We hope that you found this really helpful and useful. We have a couple resource pages on our website that are on the slides here that include information such as like we have made YouTube videos about like staff proficiency, language proficiency assessments, pay policies. We've also have materials available in Spanish. And we also have a list of language access plans in North Carolina on those pages as well. Those are in English, whereas a lot of the other resources are bilingual in either English and Spanish. We also have a newsletter where we post different resources and updates as we're continuing this work across the state. And you can also follow us on social media if you'd like. And we do want to open it up to just any questions or shared moments to kind of share your experience working on this, or anything that you have, any questions that you'd like to pose to the group or to us as well. So I'll keep this up for a bit, and then we'll see what y'all want to talk about next or answer any questions. Yes, and Magda just posted a webinar survey in here, so we really hope that's helpful. And that if you are be able to fill it out, that would be really helpful. Oops, there we go. Glad you thought it was helpful.
Brenda, I just want to add that we will share the slides later and the recording of the webinar. It'll take a minute for us to edit, like the beginning of before people joined. So as soon as we have that, we'll share it with you. And again, if you have any questions, this is a great moment where we have Hannah, Emily, and Brianna in the room. And last, we've created this survey just to help us with future opportunities. It's short. I think if you can take a minute to complete that, it'll be really, really helpful. We'll appreciate it.
And Emily just put a link in the chat to our English language access page. But we'd be happy to answer any questions. It can be very specific to your organization too, if you have a burning specific question or anything that you'd like to ask.
You know, while they're looking over those that survey question, I just want to express my appreciation for First Magna for really reaching out to you and really pulling your team together. And I think that that's really wonderful training that you provided. And I just am excited about what potentially can happen to our grantees and really getting some foundational and some direction on what they need to do. So thank you, and thank you for our grantees for showing up. So thank you very much. And again, Magda, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It was our pleasure. We're glad that we were able to find a date and time that works for everybody, all the way from East Coast to West Coast, and in the middle of a not storm perhaps, but a snowy day. We really appreciate y'all hopping on and really value this work. So excited to see all of your plans in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, if there's no more questions, we don't have to stay longer. But again, feel free to reach out to us, to our trainers. And yeah, thanks for being here this morning or afternoon over there. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Hi, Magda.